So today's conversation is around offers and contracts, right? So it's going to be a refresher, obviously, but if you guys have questions, feel free to stop me at any point. So I want to be able to just run through them. And if I can, I want to try to pull up the Hartford contract as well, which is a little different than the one that we typically use, which is the MLS contract. So I'm gonna screen share. I've already set up a fake test buyer so that YouTube is nice to me. There's no personal information. And so I started it from this screen. Once the buyer is created, the opportunity is created, you do want to make sure that before you create the DocuSign room, one, that you do it from here, pretty much so that the documents are then just linked and it's easier to pull later. But then this checklist drop down is also important to choose what type of transaction it is. Like if it's a referral, it'll just give you like the few necessary things for a referral, right? Versus a buyer, it gives you the drop down. So then when I open up DocuSign, it should we realize rentals might be a little different, but it should for buyers and sellers give me the documents that I need. So I'm gonna just put whoever the agent is as the primary, and then just always put me as the secondary agent. That way I'm automatically synced to the room with you guys. Do. Seriously? Rude.
Josie, I've been getting that message since yesterday. I've been trying to do two things, and I keep
Hmm,
getting that message yesterday.
interesting. I have not gotten that message. Test. I wonder if it's because do we see a 2025? We do not. Huh. Refresh. I have not seen that. Of course, that would happen today. Let's see. DocuSign room. Hmm.
It happened yesterday. I left it alone. I tried it this morning, and I was getting the same error message. But
Oh,
some I was actually
that
getting into, but not all.
that must be a DocuSign issue. Boo. Okay. Well, I just saw there was some other random test rooms in here, so I'm gonna just pull up one of those for now so that there we go. Josie test room. Okay. So when you're in DocuSign, so some quick tips that we've gone through. I probably should do just a straight DocuSign mastermind at some point. But always come in as much as possible to edit this piece. So if you have like if you're the seller or representing the buyer, whichever person, right, fill in this information as much as possible. Oh, we're just gonna change that. 'Cause she's no longer Berg. And then that way when you fill this information in, it'll just autofill. For example, put Josie Ambrose. It'll autofill as much as it can. I know at AOL. 123 Main Street, Stratford, and okay. So now it won't have my pre-filled items because this is a fake test room, but that's okay. So if that happens and you have to pull it from scratch, you just go right on in here. So the main libraries, quote unquote, at the bottom, there's the Connecticut Realtors Association, the 616 is our office, and then there's the MLS. So there's certain CAR forms that we use, there's certain MLS specific ones, and then there's certain that our office has customized. The office ones are mainly like the buyer agreement, et cetera. So we're not filling those out today because this is offers and contracts specifically. Um, the MLS is where you're going to want to pull the contract. So if you search contract, it should say the standard form real estate contract. You can always click this to preview if you're not sure if the document is the right one. And you should hopefully be able to recognize, right, once you see it. So I'm going to grab this and you can just keep grabbing what you need. I mean, we're just doing contracts right now, so I don't need like disclosures or anything like that because I'm on the buy side in this instance, right? I do want to see if the CAR, the Hartford one, we'll use this example. So this sometimes the Hartford like offices, so if it's like a, I don't know, a Harford County property, then this might be the one that they request us to use, as opposed to the Smart MLS one. They just have their own that they prefer. So we will pull this one as well, just so I can kind of show you some of the main differences. Okay, so now once we are in the contract, I'm gonna open it up. Well, it does that. So we have our handy dandy test property here, 248 Salem Street in Bridgeport. I literally just looked up what was active on the MLS. And so the ways that I make it faster is I will go through and copy and paste, right, to go back and forth into the document. So seller, you're going to pull from the tax record. So, right, you would do additional info, tax record. And I'm not going to pull it up because then it will show the whoever the seller's name is. But that's how you would find it. So we'll just put seller name one or Mr. Seller. And so we're going to say Mr. Seller lives at the property. So I'm just going to control copy paste the real property address. So this is not always the same. So make sure that you actually check the tax record because Mr. Seller might live in Tennessee for all we know. So whatever it shows is their mailing address is what you would want to put here. The real property address is the actual address that you're putting that offer on, right? My information, like you can see, it just dropped in here. Now, because these bricks are kind of set up this way, this is kind of the default of where they're gonna go. I do not like this because then it kind of makes it a little funkier sometimes when you go to get to the actual envelope. So I do prefer when it's this format, just all tight together, and it doesn't really make a huge difference, right? I'm not going to change it because I don't want to waste my time, but you could just understand. Now, for the personal property, so that's going to be basically like oven, things like that. So I scroll down to find, of course, I found one where there's no. So appliances included is where it would be. In this instance, I must have picked a funky one and there's no appliances included. But we're just going to pretend that it said refrigerator, oven slash range, washer dryer. So whatever's in that space to be excluded. So sometimes people might forget this. That is actually going to be right here towards the bottom. So the following items are not included. That is important to always look for that if you're putting an offer together, because maybe the washer dryer is not included, or maybe it literally might be, the gorgeous chandelier in the dining room is not included. So if there's something here and they haven't provided a separate like property inclusion exclusion addendum, you do want to make sure to take a look if there's anything specific not included. Now that I see the listing agent, I do know that this is going to be an REO property because he does like strictly REO properties. Um, Okay, so now offer wise. So if you're doing, let's say, you guys do want to make sure you have the pre-approval in advance. We're assuming this is not a cash person in this example. Um, for the way that I do this, I kind of work um, starting here and then kind of through. So if let's just say it's, I don't know, $500,000, we're just going to use round numbers. And when that offer comes through from you guys, or if you're looking at it from the pre-approval letter, so this is someone, they're conventional financing, they're putting 10% down payment, and they're gonna do $10,000 in earnest money, right, for the initial deposit. So I'm gonna do $10,000, 500,000. I'm gonna take my handy dandy calculator, right? And I said 10% down payment, right? So that's going to be 50,000. But then I'm going to minus out my 10,000 deposit, right, to get me my $40,000 cash to close, basically. So I always do the deposit portion first, and then my 500,000, right? My 90% basically difference, right? The 450. So however you want to work the math on that, but just make sure I always go earnest money first. What's the total that I'm doing? And then calculate to figure these out. And then I will always re-add everything because sometimes if you're in a rush and you'll be like, wait, that doesn't actually add up to 500,000, right? So make sure that it does. Now, initial deposit can be competitive. It's not required, but if you want your offer to stand out, then do a second deposit, right? Sometimes maybe you only do 1% here and then you want to offer another 1% like after the home inspection, for example. So then you would push this out for a couple of weeks. Let's say with the home inspection, today's 25th, 4th, 11th. So we'll say that this would be due the 12th. Um, Now line C is always going to match line A here if it's financed, third party mortgage. So purchase money is more like if it's like seller financing or something like that. So it's very rare that we use this option. Third party just means it's through a bank, right? So the term of the years, unless the pre-approval says differently, we kind of always default to 30. And then if it's conventional, it's normally a 30-day close unless it's a quirky bank that we're not familiar with. I will do a 45-day close because a lot of times that's when we run into issues. So, Joe Schmo Bank from upstate New York that we've never heard of, they're getting a 45-day like leeway on the offer. Otherwise, most banks, most of our lenders, they can do a 30-day on a conventional. Even FHA, most of them can do a 30-day on an FHA. Things that you want to keep in mind if you're putting together your offers, if it is, for example, like a condo where they're going to need to order condo docs, resale packages, give yourself extra time. If the person's using like time to own down payment, or if they're using like CHAFA or something else, give yourself an extra 1 to 2 weeks. So that would be more of that 45-day window, for example. If it's a VA loan, give yourself 60 days, right? Because VAs, it takes longer typically with some of the financing pieces and the appraisal and things like that. They just have more restrictions. And there's other different potential types of random, loans that might come into the equation, but most typically that's what you're looking at. So standard, typical for conventional FHA is going to be 30 days, unless it's again like a foreign bank or lender that we're not really familiar with. And then VA is going to be 60 days. And then if it's like some kind of extra down payment or there's going to be like another layer of financing in there, then that's when you'd want to go at least 45 days. So for that 45 days, I know I said this was conventional, so let's say if it wasn't. So 45 days, the way I think Val has always taught me when I started was kind of count out 6 weeks. So I count out 6 Fridays. It's the middle of the week, so I might not count this week, right? The offer might not be accepted till tomorrow or whatever the case is. So let's say next week is my first Friday. So it's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, right? So that puts me till April 10th. Now, if I'm trying to be more competitive, okay, maybe I can push it to the third. And, if we need to ask for an extension or whatever the case is, just use your best judgment. And then obviously, this is also taking into account whether or not, the seller, whatever they request on the offer page. So I always do the closing date first because then for the mortgage commitment, as much as possible, we will try to offer the week prior, right? Because to me, honestly, the mortgage commitment is basically when I want to know that we have a clear to close or about to get a clear to close within a day. So we always try to do it 1 week prior. Sometimes people will ask us to tighten it up and do it, 2 weeks prior or something like that than the actual closing date. Um, this piece here, where is the closing going to take place? So this is generally like a TBD. Unless you already know both parties live in Fairfield County or both parties live in New Haven County or whatever the case is, then I might just put that. But otherwise, I kind of just to be decided, right? Like kind of leave it open. Once you plug this date in here, it'll just automatically fill into the rest. And then for the inspection, we do 2 weeks from today's date, right? So if today's the 25th, I'm literally going 1, 2, and I do the 11th. So same thing. Yes, sometimes people will ask us to tighten it up, but it's just the required is 10. We give ourselves that buffer by just going 2 weeks out. Gives our clients a little bit of extra leeway to be able to get all of their inspections scheduled and things like that. Now, for your actual inspection items, wait, I'm sorry. So the actual, what did I miss? The attorney's review. So in the actual paperwork, so I want to make sure that you guys understand all the different sections, but also so that you're explaining these to your buyers before they're actually going to sign things, right? Because yes, we say read it, but they're probably not. So at some point, it is your responsibility to make sure that you've done a high level overview with them about all the different contingencies inside of the contract. So there's the financing terms, the attorney's review. our, or not our, but the smart MLS contract is the only one that's going to have this. The CAR and the Hartford version does not have this attorney review period. This is one reason that we actually prefer the MLS version because it gives that 5 day. Basically, they could cancel for any reason that they want under the attorney review period. And once in a blue moon, somebody will ask us, especially if they're not using this version of the contract, they'll ask us to remove it, right? Or to cross it out or something. It's very rare, but at least once a year, I feel like somebody pushes back about it. Um, but this is just a protection for our buyers, basically, which is why we like it in there. Now for your inspection contingency. So all of this is important. You have to be careful when you're checking it off here. So you're always, unless the very rare instance somebody's waiving it, and then in which case literally put waive. So that's different than inspection only or as is, right? Waiving means I am 100% not sending anybody to the property. I'm always going to do my title search, but everything else might be waived, right? So unless you're in that boat, it's always building, termite, title. So the ones that I will always check off automatically, and asbestos. The other ones are kind of contingent on the property. So is it a septic and well? So if we go back to our sample property here, I can just click right on utilities and it'll take me to the section I need, right? So the heat type, right, it says gas, public water, public sewer. So it would tell me right here if it was septic, if it was well, if it was oil, etc. Now, because this one is a bank owned, then I might just check off oil just in case, because the bank takes no liability for things that they don't know. The other piece, like for lead, right? When was it built, basically? So if it was built in 1985, I don't need to check off lead. It was built in 1916, I'm gonna check off lead. So I don't need septic. Water and well is really only necessary if there is a well on the property. You do not need to check these off. They don't need a water inspection if it's public water provided, right? Radon has to do with the basement. So if there is a basement, finished or not, right? If they ever might want to finish it, then they should have radon testing done. Even if it's like a condo on the bottom floor, then they might want to have radon testing done because radon basically impacts the lowest part of the home, right? But if it's like a high-rise condo and you're on the second, third floor, or something, then no, you don't need to have radon testing done because you're not going to be impacted by radon levels. But any other type of situation, then yes, it's optional, but to protect our client, I will normally check off yes, right? And then for oil, like I said, in this instance, I might check it off. But if it doesn't say oil most of the time, I'll just click waived, right? And then we saw in 1916, so yes. So that's how I kind of run through when I'm picking what to select for the mechanicals. Now, for the property report, if there was disclosures, right? So you would go to your additional info and you'd be looking for whatever associated document. So in this case, there's just a random seller's addendum thing because it's a bank owned. So of course, I picked not the best example. But if you, that's where you found your property lead, etc. If it's not provided, I just don't have the buyer initial, but I will give them an opportunity when I send the offer, right? To say, hey, the disclosures weren't uploaded. Send them over to me so that I can have my client initial that they received them. If we never get them, then the seller has to pay a $500 fine. So that is important to know. So just make sure that they don't initial that they received it if they haven't actually received it. Same for the lead disclosure, right? Um, Property disclosure is not required if it's like a probate, right? Or something like that because or an estate sale because the person has passed away who actually lives in the home, right? Lead disclosure, even if it's bank owned, is required for anything before 1978 or 68, I forget. Um, 78. And then, so this is a little bit newer since 2024, I believe, right? So you want to make sure that you're finding out how much of the commission buyer's fee, right, is being offered. So generally, you do want to put what's being offered. If you are going to be charging your buyer more, then that would be noted on the buyer addendum. Um, so most of the buyer agreements we put 2.5%. So then we'll request the 2.5, and then if they tell us it's going to be two or something like that, then we can always get this updated later. Um, Now, so I'm not going to necessarily read every line of this, but just high level. So, possession and occupancy, basically just saying that, the seller would need to be out of the home. It needs to be in broom clean condition, for example. Um, that is a little different if it says it's as is. I mean, it should still be in reasonable condition, but um, all of their items, for example, should be out of the home. Additional terms, so this is super important. So if it's like a condo, right, you're putting your extra things. So when you guys send the offers through the offer form, a lot of times you'll see kind of the verbiage there. So subject to, buyer's review and approval of condo resale package, for example. If it is a third party, like an estate or a probate, so subject to um, either third party approval. So in this instance, this is a bank owned actually. So that's what we would put third party approval or bank approval. And if it was like a probate, then or estate, same thing, subject to probate approval or probate sale approval. Other different examples would be so if it is Chaffa and certain Chaffa deals that, or even like a VA where they get 100% financing, but they still have to provide an earnest money deposit, but they get that deposit back at closing. So that would be an instance, for example, I'm actually going to show you that. So if it was, let's say if this was a VA buyer, same thing, $500,000, and they're getting 500,000 in financing because they're getting 100% financing as a veteran buyer. So there's no cash to close, no balance, right? We're not doing a second deposit or anything. And we're doing $5,000 as an earnest money. So we're just doing 1% from our veteran buyer. So here on page 2 is where you would put either $5,000 or or even if not the amount. So EMD earnest money deposit to be returned to buyer at closing. That's different than asking for like a closing cost, right? Because they're fully getting this back because it is 100% financing, for example. If it is like a seller credit, then seller to provide a $2,000, well, you're not going to do $2,000, $10,000 um, credit to buyer um, at closing. Oh, no, sorry. To buyer towards closing costs and prepaids. So the wording is very important because they're not just getting a credit, like it's not going in my pocket, for example. It needs to be noted that it's going towards closing costs and prepaids, right? So that would be the difference. If you run out of space, you can just use this rider line and I just put like a strike through. And then if I need to put like, if it's a lot of things, like maybe it's a condo and it's also going to be probate, and I'm also asking for a seller credit, and all of that's not going to fit in these two lines. I'll just drop one of them to this line and then I'll just cross this out because there's no rider attached. A separate rider is sometimes there's like a well rider or a concrete rider that sometimes we'll get from Hartford clubs, Hartford locations, or sometimes there might be a seller specific type rider that they provided that is specific, like an as is rider or something like that. Um, if there is something, I don't usually note it here. I will only put like if we did, for example, an escalation clause, that would be an example where I might put see escalation addendum attached. An escalation clause would be maybe I'm offering 500,000, but my client is willing to go up to 525. So that's where we would put the escalation clause um, or notation, and it's a separate addendum where it would say that the buyer's, willing to go up to $5,000, um, or 525, et cetera, et cetera. So there's a specific verbiage that I have in my email somewhere. Anytime somebody needs an escalation clause, then I just copy and paste, and then I can use the same information. If I could find escalation. I sent it to, here we go. So perfect. So purchaser agrees to pay X dollars more, right? So usually it might be $2,000, $5,000 more than the highest net competing offer presented to the seller. In no event shall purchaser pay a purchase price of more than $525,000, for example, net to seller. As a precondition, the seller agrees to provide the purchaser with a complete bona fide copy of the competing benchmark offer. Basically, if you're saying that you need me to go up to my top escalation clause amount, you need to provide me with a copy of your highest offer, and they can redact like personal information, but you need to show me that you got an offer for, let's say, 523 to justify me actually having to go up to my 525, for example. Um, and as long as they're willing to do that, then okay, then my buyer is willing to go up to that amount, right? So that would be an example. And that just gets put on a general addendum form, for example. Warranty deed kind of just talks about title, and then all of this, like I said, is some of the more stuff that you guys can just read in detail. Talks about the escrow deposit, for example. We know that escrow gets held with our attorneys. It does not come to our brokerage anymore. So if we are on the seller side, it always gets sent to the attorney. If we represent the buyer, we need to find out, do they want it sent to the seller's attorney? Do they want it sent to their brokerage? Because there are other brokerages that will hold escrow. Um, and then adjustments at closings. A lot of this is just more legal jargon, basically, to kind of protect the client and explain the different rules of how they need to honor the contract and things like that. Obviously, no personal property is included in the sale. So TVs, furniture, things of that nature is not considered. It's only fixed property. If it's attached to the home in some way, then it can be considered fixed property, right? So built-in shelving is fixed property, right? So if you go and do a final walkthrough and they've removed all the shelving, then that could be grounds for a problem. Um, and then it talks about the mortgage contingency, the inspection contingency. We've already kind of touched base on that. Again, title, etc. And then this part is obviously you're grabbing just the seller's information. So this I do see left off a lot. So when you're doing an offer, it's super simple to just click on the listing agent's name, and that's where you're going to find their either REB or RES, whatever the license number is. You're going to find their name, broker, email, all the stuff that you need for this section, the listing agent section of the form. Obviously, you don't need to worry about filling in either attorney's information unless you already have the buyer's attorney. And then unless you're a dual agent, if you represent the seller and you're also putting in an offer, then you would check this. Otherwise, always be sure to check that the selling agent, you, is are the buyer's agent, right? Um, and then just super quick to kind of just show you a little bit of the difference of the longer version one. Um, we have a lot of the technical, terms and all of that will be the same. But this has, for example, the checkbox if there is a property exclusion rider attached. Your personal property versus anything excluded is also going here. The difference is in how they do their financing, right? So they have the total purchase price right here at the top. And then as you kind of read it through, the deposit, so it's worded that a deposit is given at the initial contract. And we don't do that. So this should always really be zero. Like obviously I'm not giving you a deposit as I'm giving you the offer. Technically, I'm giving you my first deposit here once the contract has actually been signed, right? And it should always be within 3 calendar days that you're submitting a deposit to the other party. And then your mortgage, if you're financing, for example, um, oh, I'm sorry, this is assuming a mortgage. So this is again something that doesn't really happen, but if there was an instance of the seller transferring their mortgage to them, that's what this would be. So very rare. Um, the purchase note, like I said, kind of more like seller financing versus just a normal cash at closing. So whatever the deposit amount is that's due. So like if I did that 1% deposit out of my 10% total amount due, then that 9% balance is what that cash to close is. And it doesn't include closing costs to attorneys or anything like that. Um, and then um, and then again, the total comes here again, right? And other small differences, like you do have to check off regarding like if there's a mortgage or not. For example, is the mortgage contingency waived? You do have to check off what type of financing specifically here. So on the other contract, when I'm in the envelope, I'll usually try to remember to type in next to the financing amount. So if it was like 450,000, I'll just put like CONV for conventional or FHA like next to it. But you just can't type you cannot type words when you're in kind of this version if it's a field that's meant to only be dollars, for example. Like I can't type FHA here because of course this one it would. Because normally it would turn red on me and not let me save the document, right? Um, and then some other pieces. So you can put as far as like who is going to be holding, for example, the deposit here. The closing date is all the way down here. So again, a lot of different fields. So you just really want to take your time going through this. And this is where you put all those other conditions. If there's like a condo resale package, if it's a probate sale, if there's a seller credit being requested, any other conditions are going in this block here. Um, Title information. Um, Sometimes with like a condo, for example, you'll see like assessments, then something like that might go in this section. Otherwise, like this, the buyer is not assuming any type of liens or anything like that, obviously, with any title transfers. Um, this is if you're going to do the inspection versus if you want to choose to waive the inspection, for example. If there's special inspection, so if you were going to do like a septic and a well, you would want to note that here, but then you would also need to use those specific like septic and well riders that you can also find under the documents that are available. So just like it has asbestos, radon, mold, but this one you need those separate riders. And this is actually where you would put if you were waiving your lead inspection. And then it does ask for the email on this. So this kind of authorizes the electronic signature as well. So then that's just the only other kind of thing that stands out and who the different brokerages are. So in this case, like I said, I would keep pulling this up. I would just pull up Spadaccino Realty. It's the name of the brokerage office, and then that would just go right in here, right? So broker, buyer broker, and we're done. I see a question. Do I see a question? Yeah, this one is Janie. This one is more confusing because it's long for sure. It's 5 pages. There's a lot of details in it, which is why anytime someone requests this, like we really have to take our time to make sure, especially in the financing section. But once you read through it, so if I use the same numbers, 500,000, we're not doing a deposit, right, until it's actually like the contract is fully executed, like you see it says, right? So I'll do 3 calendar days. This is where I'm going to put my $5,000 deposit, for example. I'm not assuming a mortgage. There's no purchase money note, for example. Um, so this is the amount being financed. This is line E, right? So this was my 450 amount. And then as far as the cash to close, the balance of my deposit owed, I changed my numbers a little bit on this one. Um, so 45,000, right? Because it was 500,000 total. And then again. So the catch with this one, why they have it at the bottom here also, because if you wanted to do, and I don't like that they do this, if you wanted a seller credit, they want that reflected within these numbers as well, for example. So notice here exceeds, if the amount here exceeds the total purchase price, then the excess would be returned to the buyer at closing. So I actually don't remember. I do apologize. How do you, oh, I'm sorry. Literally it would be here. So if, for example, I wanted that $10,000 back, I would be putting this because my actual purchase price I've already said is 500. So if I'm putting 510 here, it's because I'm asking for $10,000 back as a seller credit at closing. So again, I know it's a little tricky for this one. The rest of it is not nearly as complicated, but the financing piece is the piece that you want to pay attention to.
Wouldn't the credit be after like the inspection?
The
That's when we would
seller
ask for a
credit,
credit? Yeah.
No, not always, because if you know, for example, a property needs a lot of work, then you can ask for a credit up front. Sometimes the lenders will tell us that the buyers they're going to need like they don't have enough cash reserves themselves, so they'll need a credit in order to even be able to make the deal work. So it's not going to work on a brand new house that has like full remodel and everything. But if the house needs a little bit of work or, whatever the case is, sometimes people might need the cash, but they actually can still qualify for more than what the house is worth. So if it's a house for 250, I could offer 275, let's just say, even if I don't necessarily have enough cash to close. And then I'm going to ask for, let's say, $15,000 in a seller credit. So technically, I'm really offering 260, right? So I'm offering $10,000 above the list price. And then I'm just asking basically, so I'm essentially asking you to help me with my closing costs. That's what that comes down to, right? So the inspection is one area, but you can also just ask for a seller credit upfront if you need to. It is not recommended if you're trying to be competitive. But if the house has been on the market for a while and if your buyer actually needs it, then yes, that's an option.
Okay.
Any other questions? I know we went over, but I really wanted to show you guys this one also.
And Josie, remind me when would we use this one? You were saying this is the Hartford contract, so it's only
Well, it's so there's a Hartford one that I couldn't find, and it says like Greater Hartford Board of Realtors, I believe, at the top. I
This
forget
says
what
it
the
on the bottom. If you scroll down towards the end, it says Greater Hartford. This is the GAR one,
Oh,
right?
it does. Oh, yeah, that's
Yeah.
Engar. That's
Mhm.
what I was. Okay. So yes, so
I
this would
believe
be
in the MLS, it'll show on the property if they want you to use this contract or not. That's what I've
correct.
seen.
Correct, yeah. Or not always. Sometimes they'll just like if we submit the one version, they'll say, "Oh, can you resubmit it using like this version?" It only comes up if it's like a Hartford club. I keep saying club. I'm like stuck in my gym days. If it's a Hartford um location, so Hartford County, Litchfield County, anywhere that's like outside of Fairfield, New Haven County. Sometimes those other areas do prefer this version because they like the terms more. And the terms are actually they're a little bit more ironclad, some of them, but it doesn't include the attorney, which is one of the ones that we prefer in Fairfield County. Yeah, but for the most part, like I do not volunteer this contract at all. I use the other one.
So
Um,
if for any reason, if we go to fill out that offer form and they require that, you would just ask for us to put that in the notes, right? Like they're
correct.
requiring the Greater Hartford.
Correct. Exactly. Right. You would just need to put that in the notes to let me know. Yeah. hmm Um, any other questions between the two contracts? Yeah. Okay. Well, that's all we have. If you have a question at some point, something that you didn't think of, just reach out. But that was just kind of a quick high level overview of the two main contracts that we'll use. The only other thing would be sometimes a purchase offer, which is like lower Fairfield County. So I know it's weird, but there's all these different quirks. So like if you're like Stanford, Norwalk, Granite, some of those like literally lower Fairfield County, they prefer which is like an offer, it's almost like an intent to offer, if you will, but it's not a full contract until they actually approve your offer. And we still don't really do that. So sometimes we might get something like that from them. We will still submit an offer on the MLS, but it's because they prefer their attorneys to do an attorney contract. So that's the main reason. So they won't accept necessarily, they will not have their sellers sign that MLS contract because they like their 20-page attorney contracts, which the attorneys draft from scratch. So that's the only other thing that sometimes you might see besides the MLS or the CAR version would be that purchase agreement, if you will, which is just a super basic form that just says like this is how much I want to offer, and take it or leave it kind of a thing. But yeah, hopefully that makes sense. Questions?
Thank you very much, Josie.
I
Sure,
appreciate
Roger.
it.